Okay, sorry my throat is a little raspy this morning, so I'm sounding a little husky. But when you have four terms and there's nothing common that all four terms have that you can factor out, it's called factor by grouping. So take your first two, cut it in half. So you're just gonna cut it in half. Then you're gonna look at this half and you're gonna say, what does it have in common? And notice the greatest thing it has in common is they both have at least an x to the second. So I'm gonna pull out an x to the second. If I'm left with that, I've got 7x, because notice if you multiply those two together, you get 7x squared, minus, and notice that would be 1, because x squared times 1 is x squared. Now, whatever this sign is, this is a little trick, just carry it straight down. Now, this is kind of gross, but in order for factoring to work, factor by grouping, I know that this set of parentheses has to look exactly the same. So in my calculator real quick, I really hoped 36 would go into this. I didn't know. So in your calculator, hit 252 divided by 36. And guess what? It goes in there evenly 7 times. So what I'm saying is that 36 times 7 is 252. And yes, I tried that on my calculator. Okay, so I'm like, oh gosh, 36 goes into there both times. So what I do is I'm like, I pull out the 36. Now, whatever this is, I copy it over. And so these two have to be exactly the same or it's not gonna work. And then I just make sure it works. Well, negative 36 times a positive 7x. Negative and a positive is negative, that works. 36 times 7, we already know, is 252, and there's the x. And then look here, a negative and a negative is a positive, so it works. Okay, remember when you factor, the goal is to have two things that multiply together to give you this. So in one of these, it doesn't matter which one you put it in, you're gonna put what both sides have in common, which is a 7x minus 1. And then in the other set of parentheses, you put what's left, which is an x squared minus 36. Now, sometimes you're done, remember that is there. Sometimes you're done, but sometimes it will factor further. Notice this one has an x to the second. That means it will most likely factor again, and it does. Okay, so here's this guy, 7x minus 1, okay? This one is the difference of two perfect squares because x times x is x squared, 6 times 6 is 36, and I know my signs have to be different, otherwise I'd have a middle term. So this is how you factor it. Now, if you wanted to set this equal to 0, I'm not sure how far you're going on this, but you'll do this eventually. You have to decide what makes each of these 0. So you would set each one equal to 0, each factor. So this is factoring. What I'm doing right now is called solving. So you would solve this, and I don't know where you're at on that. So you would get negative 6. Here, you would get 6. If you solve this, add 1 to both sides, you would get x equals 1/7, okay? So these are the value of x that if you plug it in, it would give you 0. So if you're having to factor, stop here. If you're solving, keep going. Okay, so again, we're gonna do this one more time. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Cut it in half. Notice I leave the little sign on the right side. What does this have in common? This one happens to have an x squared in common. If I factor that out, I'm left with x minus 2. And you can see, if you multiply that back in, I get exactly what I started. Bring your sign straight down. Now, this doesn't have anything in common. So I'm gonna put a 1 because it has nothing in common. And then remember, this set of parentheses has to be exactly the same. So I just copy it over. And I look, does it work? Well, negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times a negative 2 is a positive 2. So gosh, it does work. And then I got my 2 sets of parentheses. In one set, I've got x minus 2, because that's what they both have in common. In the other one, I have what's left, which is an x squared minus 1. Now again, this one will factor further. That's the difference of squares again, because x times x is x squared. 1 times 1 is 1. I know my signs have to be different, okay, to get that. And then don't forget to bring him back down, okay? So that's it factored. If I was going to solve, okay, what would make it 0? It would be a negative 1, because negative 1 plus 1 is 0. It would be a positive 1, because 1 minus 1 is 0. And it would be a 2, okay? So again, this is called factoring. This is called solving.